You need to, if you value your relationship, you need to take care of it. The problem is a lot of us don't know how. And that's
Right.
where Fascinating Womanhood comes in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fascinating Womanhood channel, where we talk about all things that have to do with femininity and building strong relationships. I am Cherry Lynn, and I am here with Dixie Undelin Forsyth. Hi.
Hi, Cherry.
What we're talking about today is really just answering, for the most part, a lot of questions that we have had about romance and couples having a long-lasting romantic relationship. We either hear people say that they think it's completely unrealistic, or they don't believe it's possible, or they don't understand it and what it looks like. Just so many questions.
It's amazing to me. There are people that I know, and I'm sure that you know, that have never seen a romantic relationship that is mature in the sense that they've been together for years. More people than I wish that there were. I wish there was no one who had no idea what a romantic marriage really looked like. A romantic marriage that wasn't just honeymoon and you just barely got married, but one that was mature over years. But I promise you, it is possible. I've seen it. I have it. I know other people that have it. And that's what Fascinating Womanhood is all about, teaching women what they can do to develop this literally lifelong love affair with the man that you fell in love with in the first place.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up about having that example in front of you, because if you've never seen it, it's very easy to believe that it doesn't exist. And that's what, like you said, Fascinating Womanhood is all about, is about teaching how to achieve that.
Well, and first of all, what does it look like? This kind of a romantic marriage is where you're happy just to be together, even if you're not speaking. You're sitting beside each other, each reading a book. It's where you cherish somebody, you value them, you look forward to seeing them every time they come home. You enjoy getting away with them. If you have a lockdown like some of us are still going through now, and you have to spend a lot of time together, you think, wow, we actually get to spend more time together. You adore that person in spite of their weaknesses, in spite of their faults, and they do you. This kind of love is the most amazing feeling that I think a human being can have. And that's why we want it for all of you.
Yes, and it's absolutely attainable for everyone.
As long as you're married to a basically good person.
Okay, so we're going to basically just do a little Q&A today.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to ask you a few questions that have been asked of us. All right, so number one, what is romance? What kind are we talking about today?
I was already kind of speaking to it before. It's where you know each other's deepest desires, deepest dreams. You can trust them with your biggest fears and weaknesses and know you will not be rejected or judged. You can endure separation. It can even withstand death. Your relationship you don't cease to care about them or love them. It can endure a long-term illness. It can endure everything that life has to throw at you.
I've heard you say this several times, you are each other's number one confidant. I think that's a really great way to describe romance, because I think a lot of people, when they think of romance, they just think of Valentine's Day type of thing. It's like, I think of hearts and flowers.
Yeah. And
dating.
It's partly that, but it doesn't consist of that, because life is real and there's all kinds of things we have to do and challenges. When you have years of memories with somebody, it really makes you closer when those memories are not destructive. And when you have had problems, but you've gotten through them, and you have that to look back on and say, remember when this happened, and remember how we felt, and it just makes you feel closer to the person.
Why do so many people think romance goes away? I have heard this so much. They just think, oh, well, the honeymoon's over. We're not newlyweds anymore. Why do people feel like that?
I think there's probably a number of reasons. I think that people start to see their spouse, they start to see their flaws, their weaknesses, and some of the fantasy that they didn't realize they had kind of wears off, and they stop, as we say, putting their best foot forward when they're with them. They let down, and we don't do the things we did when we were dating and actually taking care of the relationship. We kind of let it go. Some people actually think that romance has a shelf life, that it's supposed to end after a while. And I actually heard one of my relatives say, well, after a while, that part goes away, and what you're left with is a Christ-like love for that person. And I thought, but that's supposed to be all people. You're supposed to have this, in Christianity, we say a Christ-like love for all people, and I wouldn't just marry anyone. So that's not good enough for me. I have a Christ-like love for people I don't even know. So
well, to me, that almost sounds like you're starting to think of your spouse as a roommate a little bit.
Yes, and I don't want Bob to be my roommate. I want him to be my best friend, the man I'm in love with, my lover, my confidant, everything. And when he walks in, I want my heart to always kind of flutter when I see him. And so far, it still does. And
that's not just something that happens.
No, you have to take care of it. Just like, okay, years ago, we had a car. A family member, who shall remain nameless, was just starting out. We were a little older, so we gave him this car as a starting thing. He didn't know anything about cars, and he did not change the oil. He didn't really take care of it. He just thought it just sort of took care of itself, I guess. About a year later, he said, am I supposed to change the oil? Something's happening with the engine. You have to take care of a car. You have to rotate the tires. You have to do all kinds of things if you want your car to last, if you don't want it to become the engine falls out by the time it's just a few years old. Because you can absolutely ruin a car if you don't take care of it. The same thing is true with a relationship. You need to, if you value your relationship, you need to take care of it. The problem is a lot of us don't know how. And that's where Fascinating Womanhood comes in.
I love that analogy with the car. That's really, really good, because those of us who've had lots of cars know how much work they can be. Yeah. Is it realistic to have romance? What about life challenges?
Yeah, some people think that if you go through a challenge like, say, bankruptcy or bad health or an accident or something like that, or a death in the family, that is going to ruin your relationship. It absolutely can draw you closer together, or depending on if you become each other's enemies, it can pull you apart, but it isn't a foregone conclusion.
No, I'm really glad that this is being asked, because one of the most common questions that I hear related to this question, as far as specifics, is when you have children. Yes. And you don't have time for each other. You don't have time for date nights. You're stressed out. You're sleep deprived. There's so many things. And having children lasts a long time. I mean, especially when they're little in the challenging years, and it can take a toll on your relationship. So a lot of people have this belief that when you have kids, your romance just goes away and we just accept it. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because it is possible, if you are not very careful, that it can do that. But the thing that I think helped us is that Bob was always number one in my heart, and he knew it. I always, like, if I had to be up in the night, we weren't getting to have a lot of pillow talk like we normally do. He knew that I would say, I wish I was, we were snuggling in bed, and he knew that it was a sacrifice that we both made. I didn't ever treat him as though, I have the kids now, I don't need you. Some of it is just in your approach to things. And those times when you have babies, it's relatively brief in the span of your life. I know, because I miss it. I miss it now, and I haven't had babies for years. And it seems like forever at the time. So you don't want to sacrifice your relationship when you have little ones, because for most of your life, when you don't, and you can't say, well, we'll worry about that later, and we'll repair it all later. You can absolutely do whatever you can. You can't do as much as I can do now, but you can do whatever you can, and at least he will know he is number one. And you're thinking of him, gosh, I wish we could do this. I wish we could do that. I had 7 children and 10 pregnancies. I had a tubal pregnancy, which was very serious.
If you can go through this, and anyone can, if you can get through it and still have romance in your marriage, then I think that's the ultimate example. And I think this is a really tough one. I feel like we could do a whole video about just this one subject.
And we should. Yeah, we should, because especially if you're not used to, if you have a baby and you've never had one before, it's your first one, and you feel like everything is completely changed, which it has, then you might want a little bit of help in getting oriented again.
The biggest takeaway I think that I have from what you said is him being number one in your heart. And that's going to show through if you truly do have him.
And tell him.
In your heart. It doesn't mean that you ignore your kids. It just means that I love what you said about like, oh, I wish I could be here with you. Like that's such a simple and easy thing to do.
Well, being number one in your heart doesn't mean your children are number 100. I mean, it's they're number 2. It's not like they're unimportant.
I've actually read this by several celebrities and authors. All say the same thing. When your kids are grown and gone, you have your relationship, and so that's really important. And same thing with you. All of the kids are gone, and now you have your marriage, and you have that for a very long time. So it's worth that investment.
You don't want what you want to, if you want to be a great mother, one of the things you want to give your children, actually one of the number one things you want to give your children is a good relationship between you and your husband. Yes. And you cannot do that if you don't take care of it. Taking care of it doesn't mean you spend every moment together. And that is the way life is.
Okay. What about less romantic personalities? We've heard this so many. You'd be surprised how many times we hear this. My husband's just not into romance, or I'm just not into romance, or this is just not who we are. We are not lovey-dovey or affectionate. What about those kinds?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. There's no such thing as people who really aren't interested in romance, but there are many people who have built up very thick walls of reserve, who've been very hurt, and they block it off because they either have given up, they think it's not possible, or every time they're near it, they seem to get burned. It isn't that they were not born with a romantic bone in their body, because it is the greatest feeling anyone can ever have, is that kind of a relationship. It's the absolute best. Men have vulnerable egos. They protect themselves. Women can too. We've had some questions about women lately, and do they build up walls of reserve? And they yes, they do. But it's a whole different issue, which we could talk about another time. If somebody says they're not romantic, that's a perfect time, as every time, to accept someone at face value, but at least you'll know that's what they think the truth is. But it's more likely than not they've been hurt, and they don't. It reminds them of pain.
You're saying that there's something more deep, there's an underlying deeper thing going on. Okay.
It isn't that they just have a less romantic, it's not their personality. It's a protection. That's something that's good for you to know. I wouldn't talk to them about it. I would just, this is something for you as a woman to just know and think, okay, and you move on with Fascinating Womanhood Principles. And
yes, there's so many other steps with this one that I feel like we could go on to, but that's a good answer though. I think that makes sense. So I'm glad that you were able to clarify that. What if the romance has been gone for a long time? So this is probably more of those couples that have been married for a really, really long time, and the woman maybe perhaps is watching this and saying, well, I haven't felt like we've had romance in our marriage for years. Yeah. What do I do now?
Is that even completely dead? No, I'd say absolutely not. In fact, sometimes with men who have not had it for a long time, they respond even quicker. It's like they've been dying of thirst in the desert. And when they start to get admired for things by the woman who is in this relationship with them, and they start to really be admired and appreciated and accepted, they're like a dying person who's trying to get air, who's drowning. No, it doesn't mean that it's too dead to resurrect. No, not at all.
So that lady out there, if you're watching, you will definitely want to read the book.
Particularly Timeless, because it's so much more in depth. And by the way, some of these men have never had this experience their entire life. Their parents didn't have a good marriage, their aunts and uncles, whatever. They've never seen it. If they start to see it in you, it's like they'll feel like they have a whole new relationship.
Okay, so our last little question here is kind of a silly, funny one, but why do men tend to not like romantic movies? I'm not saying all men. Some men love them. Some men are okay with them. But there's a very common theme that men like action movies and they just don't want to watch a romantic comedy very often. So what do you think about that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. It's one of my favorites. Men tend to be more action-oriented. I'm sure you've realized that. Those of you out here, husbands like to watch these car chases and suspense things. romantic movies make men feel more vulnerable. They don't like their feelings tapped into without their permission. And they start to feel like it's tapped, and it makes them feel more vulnerable. It's the same, a little bit along the same lines as somebody asking why a woman who's feminine makes men feel more vulnerable. If they treat her like another man, they're going to feel like a cat. And so it feels like they are at a disadvantage in some ways, but in a good way for you, for us. But so if men don't like romantic movies, they often are not as in touch with that side of them and are not comfortable feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, I think too, I've heard this so many times. I've heard Dad say this several times. Sometimes action movies allow the man to feel like he's escaping from something.
Yeah. And, well, sports do too.
You know what I mean?
It makes them feel like they're kind of, I don't react this way at all with sports, but it makes him feel like he's in it and like how he's battling with life. And I think I just don't feel that.
It's interesting to me that, well, when I'm watching a romance movie, maybe that's why I like it. It's because I feel like I'm getting romance, and women tend to kind of gravitate towards that a little bit more.
We are more comfortable with our romantic feelings and talking about them.
Yeah.
But we have the ability, because of the way our brains are wired, to be able to verbalize how we feel better than men, and to be in touch with it and be able to say, well, it makes me feel this way and that way. And who did you identify with? I don't particularly like watching sports. Some women do. I would like watching sports if I knew someone on the team, or I followed them and I knew about them, because then it would be relationship oriented. I don't really care who wins the big game if I don't really know anybody on either side, and so I don't care who wins. But for Bob, he doesn't care. Even if we're passing high school sports on the side of the road, he wants to watch it, even though he doesn't know anything about
he doesn't know the team.
And they're not professional. It's like battling life for him. So for those of you, this is also understanding men. For those of you out there who think, I don't understand why this or why that, this has to do with their masculinity versus our femininity and how we approach things. But you understanding it helps you to kind of smile and think, oh, I kind of think I know why he likes this. And so instead of being irritated, you're supportive, and you make a big snack for him that he's got some man food that he's going to love to eat while he watches that. Well, and by the way, one final note on men and romantic movies: as they get more comfortable, you'll find they don't mind it so much. Most men, not probably all men, because all people aren't exactly alike. But I know Bob sometimes likes watching Pride and Prejudice, which is very much a girl's movie. He likes that. He's very comfortable with it.
Well, I've heard him say there was a time where we were watching a movie called Forever Darling with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. We were watching it together, and he was in the room, and he started falling asleep. And you said to him, "Oh, Bob, are you tired?" And he said, "It's just this movie. It's so boring." And I'll never forget him saying that, because I was like, this is like a really wonderful romantic movie or whatever. It's a very interesting story. No, he didn't think that at all, because it's about relationships and romance. So it just depends, I guess, like you said. Okay, well, this has been a really fun topic, and I'm sure we could go on and on and on about it. But these were the main questions that we had that we wanted to cover, that we felt were the most important. If you have any other questions about long-lasting romance in your marriage, drop them down below. We try to answer every single comment if we can. And we are here every week, so don't forget to check back with us. I'll also attach some links where you can find us on social media down below. Don't forget to check that out, as well as where to purchase Dixie's books, workbooks, Facebook profiles, everywhere you can find us. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Soon. Take care, everybody.